To enter Istanbul in the year 1600, we must first dismantle the modern metropolis we know today. Mentally erase the gigantic suspension bridges linking Europe and Asia, removing the cars that cross the Bosporus in a constant flow. Silence the noise of massive oil tankers and the hum of traffic horns. What emerges instead is a city of deep silences, broken by very specific sounds: the relentless cries of seagulls, the slap of water against wooden hulls, and 5 times a day a human symphony echoing from the minarets as hundreds of voices sing the call to prayer, covering the city like an invisible blanket. The landscape of 1600 is not dominated by concrete, but by wood and stone. The vast majority of houses are built of dark timber, projecting over narrow, winding streets with their enclosed balconies, the cumbus, creating tunnels of shadow where sunlight barely touches the ground. The skyline is pierced by the stone needles of minarets and the lead-covered domes of great imperial mosques, such as the Süleymaniye and Hagia Sophia, which seem to float above the hills like grey crowns. The Blue Mosque does not yet exist. Its site is merely an urban space waiting for the future. The atmosphere is dense, filled with a haze that rises from the sea in the morning, mixing with the smoke of thousands of wood-fired ovens and charcoal braziers. The smell is unmistakable, a blend of salty sea air, pungent spices, fried fish, and the musky aroma of a cosmopolitan crowd. We are at the center of the known world, the capital of an empire that stretches across 3 continents. The sense of scale is overwhelming, not because of building height, but because of the density of life. Istanbul in 1600 is a human anthill, vibrant and chaotic, where every square meter of land within the ancient walls is contested, inhabited, and intensely lived under the watchful eyes of the Sultan and of God. The reason this city exists in this exact place, and why it is the most coveted jewel on earth in 1600, is revealed only when we look at the water. Istanbul's geography is not merely a backdrop, it is its destiny. The city sits on the throne of the world, controlling the Bosphorus Strait, a vital geological fissure separating Europe from Asia and connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. Whoever controls this strait controls the flow of grain, slaves, and timber from the north, and gold, textiles, and spices from the south and east. The natural harbor known as the Golden Horn is a curve of calm, deep waters cutting into the European side of the city, offering perfect shelter from treacherous storms. In 1600, this harbor is a forest of masts. Venetian galleons, Genoese merchant ships, and agile Ottoman galleys compete for space at the docks of Eminönü. There are no bridges crossing the Golden Horn. Passage is made by thousands of boatmen, the kayukçı, who row frenetically from one shore to the other, weaving a constant and fluid transportation network across the water. The city is therefore an amphibious fortress. On one side, it is protected by the swift waters of the Bosphorus and the Sea of Marmara. On the other, by the legendary Theodosian walls, a triple barrier of stone and brick that resisted sieges for 1,000 years and still stands imposing, marking the boundary between urban civilization and the outside world. This strategic location forces encounters. Here, northern winds meet southern winds, and caravans from the Silk Road unload their riches to be shipped onward to Europe. The city functions as a cardiac valve of global trade, pumping wealth through its aquatic arteries, ensuring that in 1600 all roads no longer lead to Rome but to Istanbul. Daily life in Istanbul in the year 1600 is an assault on the senses and a lesson in human diversity. Walking along the uneven cobblestone streets, you do not hear only Ottoman Turkish. The air vibrates with a cacophony of Greek, Armenian, Ladino, Arabic, Italian, and Persian. The city is a mosaic of communities, each living in its own neighborhoods, attending its own churches or synagogues. yet inevitably mixing in the great theatre of commerce, the grand bazaar and the street markets. The rhythm of the day is dictated by trade and religion. The streets are crowded with porters, the Hamals, carrying immense loads on their bent backs, forcing their way through the crowds. The smell of freshly roasted coffee is everywhere. Coffee houses, a recent innovation spreading across the empire, are packed. Men sit on low benches, drinking the dark, thick liquid, exchanging news, gossip, and dangerously political opinions. It is a new form of social life that defines Ottoman urban culture. The background sound includes the hammering of metal workers and the calls of street vendors selling boza, a fermented drink, and simit, sesame bread. Women are less visible in open public spaces, moving discreetly under veils, but they dominate domestic life and the public baths, the hammams. Hamams are not merely places of hygiene, but vital social centers where marriage, politics, and neighborhood news are discussed beneath steam-filled marble domes. The visual richness is striking: silk tunics, turbans of every shape and color indicating profession and status, and embroidered kaftans. Life here is not gray, it is saturated with color and texture. In 1600, Istanbul does not go to sleep early. Even after sunset, life continues by the light of oil lanterns, with the city breathing like a living, sleepless organism. Power in Istanbul in the year 1600 has an unmistakable physical and symbolic address: the Topkapi Palace. Located at the tip of the historic peninsula, surrounded by high walls and gardens, it is not a vertical palace in the European style, but a succession of courtyards, pavilions, and kiosks that become progressively more private and sacred as one moves inward. It is a forbidden city within the city. Here, the Sultan rules as the shadow of God on earth, invisible to most, yet omnipresent in everyone's mind. The organization of power is meticulous. In the second courtyard, the Imperial Council, or Divan, meets to administer the vast empire. Silence is mandatory in these spaces. Thousands of people may be present, janissaries, courtiers, ambassadors, yet contemporary accounts say that not a whisper is heard, only the sound of water from fountains designed to mask secret conversations. Power also manifests in the harem, the center of private and dynastic life, where the Queen Mother, Valide Sultan, wields enormous political influence, often determining the course of the empire from behind lattice screens. Outside the palace, power is marked by monumental architecture. Imperial mosques are not merely places of worship, but vast social complexes, kulia, that include schools, hospitals, soup kitchens, and libraries, financed by the elite to demonstrate piety and authority. Justice is administered in local courts by cadis, based on religious law and the Sultan's decrees. Order is maintained or disturbed by the Janissaries, the elite military corps that in 1600 is both the armed arm of the state and its greatest internal threat, with their barracks functioning as centers of political power rivaling the palace itself. Power here is absolute, but it depends on a delicate balance between palace, mosque, and barracks. Despite its golden splendor, Istanbul in 1600 is a city built on barrels of gunpowder, both literal and metaphorical. The greatest immediate and terrifying threat is fire. Because the city is largely made of wood and the streets are narrow wind tunnels, a small kitchen accident or a knocked-over brazier can turn into an inferno that consumes entire neighborhoods within hours. Fires are frequent and devastating, black scars that constantly appear on the city's face, forcing hurried reconstruction and keeping the population in a state of perpetual alert. Beyond fire, there is the shadow of plague. Ships arrive daily from distant ports, bringing with them rats and disease. Epidemics sweep through the city cyclically, emptying streets and filling cemeteries, reminding everyone, from vizier to beggar, of the fragility of life. Political tension also simmers beneath the surface. The year 1600 marks a period of stagnation and unrest. Inflation erodes the value of the silver coin, the akçe, generating popular discontent. The Janissaries, once disciplined soldiers, revolt frequently over unpaid wages, overturning their soup cauldrons as a sign of mutiny and terrorizing shopkeepers. Palace intrigue adds another layer of fear. Succession to the throne is a deadly game. To prevent civil wars, the practice of fratricide, the execution of the new sultan's brothers, still haunts the dynasty, although it is gradually being replaced by lifelong confinement in the cage, cafes, isolated wings of the palace. This produces rulers who are often paranoid or unprepared. The city thus lives in a duality. It is the richest and most sophisticated place on earth, yet its inhabitants walk a razor's edge, where prosperity can be swallowed by fire, disease, or the sword of rebellion at any moment. When we contemplate Istanbul in the year 1600, we are witnessing the consolidation of an identity that still defines the city today. The legacy of this period is the very silhouette of the metropolis. If you look at Istanbul's skyline today at sunset, you will see the same forms a traveler saw 4 centuries ago. The Süleymaniye Mosque still crowns the hill, the Topkapi Palace still watches over the meeting of the seas, and the labyrinthine layout of the Grand Bazaar remains unchanged, pulsing with the same commercial energy. The modern city has grown upward and outward, but its ancient heart continues to beat at the same rhythm. The transition into the modern world was slow and complex. The empire that seemed invincible in 1600 would enter a long decline, yet the city never lost its importance. Wooden houses eventually disappeared, consumed by fire or replaced by concrete, but the culture of coffee, the call of the muezzin, and the vitality of the streets remained intact. The Blue Mosque would be built only a few years after 1600, completing the postcard image we know today, but the spiritual and urban foundations were already firmly in place. Istanbul is a city of layers, where the present does not replace the past, but settles upon it. Byzantine cisterns still store water beneath Ottoman streets, and the modern skyscrapers of Levant look from afar toward the minarets of the historic peninsula. The connection is unbreakable. Geography continues to dictate life. The Bosporus is still the soul of the city, and the feeling of standing at the center of the world between 2 continents is as real for today's ferry passenger as it was for a small boat rower in 1600. The past here is not a distant memory. It is the living stage on which life continues to unfold. If you enjoyed this journey through time along the streets of Istanbul, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling us which city we should reconstruct next.